Hello there, Ray here, and another snapshot is out. This is 1.13.1 pre-release 1. This one comes with some performance improvements as well as some minor bug fixes. We're going to do some tests and see if these performance improvements are actually noticeable between versions pre-release 1 and the actual 1.13 full release. So keep in mind when I do these tests, I'm going to have my settings pretty much to the lowest except for my render distance. So they said they have improved the performance of rendering chunks. So I'm just going to start a new world, see how long it takes for the chunks around me to render, the spawn chunks, as well as all the chunks that the player is going to load. So let's see how long it takes. I'm also going to be recording each of these instances, so pretty much going to be the same amount. It takes a little time to generate spawn as normal, and hopefully we'll see a difference. After I test pre-release 1, I'm going to go back and test 1.13, see if there's any difference. So now we just joined the world. Let's see how long it takes before all the chunks have loaded in the area. So the number of packets I'm receiving is slowly going down. And you see it's around 1600 now. That's usually where it's typically around. Also, you can see that the chunks that are updating are pretty much down to 0, kind of going from like 0 to like 5. So some minor updates. But for the most part, it looks like everything has loaded. Now I'm going to teleport out 1080 or 1000 and see how long these chunks take to load. Frame per second seemed pretty good. I got it stuck at 60. And you can see the packets are relatively low because I've already loaded spawn chunks. And number of chunks is slowly going down at 50 now. So it seems that the 1.13 full release is slightly faster at loading up new worlds. It's pretty marginal. When loading a new area, it seems that they were pretty much similar, except with 1.13 full release, it did keep its TPS a lot higher when loading up those new chunks, but it did receive more packets during that same time. But it seemed like overall, actually the 1.13 full release was doing better. They also said that they have improved the performance of spawning of mobs. So before, the water mobs would be quite laggy when they'd be able to spawn and despawn. So just like in my fish farm, if I would AFK very high, it could create a low TPS because the mobs are trying to spawn down below in the water because there's tons of spawning spaces. Then they would despawn very quickly afterwards. Let's go ahead and pull up our F3 screen, and we're currently at level 190. This is about where we were AFKing in our fish farm. If we look down, we can see the entity count is moving very quickly. This is entity count right here. See it's moving like almost up to 400, and you can see it going down to like 100. Frames per second staying pretty good. But what I want to test is the debug. So we type in debug, and we'll start the debug, and then we'll let it go for a little while, and then we'll stop it, and we'll see how much lag is occurring. Okay, let's go ahead and stop it. Now you don't have to use the debug if you don't want to. You also can use the F3 screen. I really like this because it shows easily shows the ticks per second, which is really nice and clear to see. So here it says we ran the test for only 22 seconds, which wasn't very long, and the ticks were 217. On average, we got about 10 ticks per second. This is pretty poor because you should on average get 20 ticks per second, so it's about half the TPS as you normally should get in the game. You can also look up here, and you can kind of do the same amount of math. So 50 milliseconds per tick is what the average should be. Anything higher than that is bad. So like 100 means that you're running at twice the. So if it's like 100 up here, that means you're running at half the TPS. And you can also see stuff like seeing how many packets are being received. So we're receiving a lot of packets. We're not sending out very many packets. Doing the test over the water, it was pretty clear that the new 1.13.1 pre-release was doing better at keeping up with the spawns of the fish in the water. The results from those tests were pretty interesting. Tell me what you guys think about those results down in the comments. Now let's look at some bug fixes. So they fixed a bug where hostile mobs were spawning in the daytime, and we also seen that bats were spawning up here in the daytime as well as slimes were spawning up on top in the daytime. So probably has to do something with them trying to optimize the way that mobs will spawn in the game. They said they fixed the bug to do with bone milling particles not showing up when bone milling stuff. So if you bone mill like grass or bone milling ground, it should show up particles. I do have my particles turned on. For some reason, they're still not showing up, so this one may not be fixed. They changed the way that the chunk command worked. So it's no longer called chunk, so now it's called force load. And then what your choices are to add, query, or remove. and we'll just add a chunk. And then we can choose the chunks that we want to add. We could force load this chunk here, or we can kind of do a whole area. So we can chunk load from one chunk to another one. So we can do that by looking down at a block, and we can also tab complete. So this chunk, those are the coordinates of this chunk here. And you can also find them up here in this area. It just uses the block coordinates, but before it used to use the chunk coordinates. So this was the chunk coordinates, and then these are the block coordinates. So we're just going to use the block coordinates. We marked that chunk out. It's already been loaded. And now we can come over to here, and we can load this area. And now you can see it marked 5 chunks in the overworld, and these are the actual chunk coordinates. So it converted your normal coordinates over into chunk coordinates. So we can also use the command force load query, and this will tell us the chunks that are being kept loaded. So there's a total of 6 chunks, and these are their chunk coordinates. You can see them all there, just in case you're wondering which ones are kept loaded. You can also use the command force load, then remove, and this will move whatever chunk you're standing in or pointing at, or you can just choose all and we'll remove all of them. So we can go ahead and test this out by having 2 different chunks, and then we'll just force load this chunk here, this current one, and this one has a word saying hi, and that one says bye, and that one's just a normal chunk. So when we leave the area, as we get far enough away, and these command blocks will go from entity processing chunks to lazy processing chunks. And then from there, they will go into unloaded chunks. And we should be able to see a difference between the 2 different types of commands, because for one of them, it should be able to be kept loaded, and there you see it. The high one is still being kept loaded because we went ahead and force loaded that chunk. So even with this chunk loading, you can go ahead and make a 5x5 grid to make the center one entity processing. So I went diagonal 2 chunks, and we're going to go force load, add this one here. And then we'll skip that chunk, and this chunk, and we'll count 2 more chunks this direction over here. Then we'll go from there, and then we'll force load to this chunk. So this way, chunks are loaded between those 2 areas. Now let's go ahead and let's fly out. We have one command block which is saying entity, and this one's just a normal one. So this one's only going to activate in redstone chunks, not unloaded ones. But also activate entity ones. This one will only activate entity ones and not redstone chunks. So for testing to see if this chunk is staying entity processing chunk, we're using Smokey's entity processing chunk detector. This is a minecart on a rail by a fence here. That's by a pressure plate, and it's activating it. That's what this minecart is doing. And then once this becomes no longer entity processing chunk, becomes a lazy processing, then it will no longer be able to activate this command block here, which is saying entity. So what we should see is that the entity one will unload, but since we have a chunk loading there, we'll be able to keep them both loaded as we move away. So let's fly away and see if we can keep them both loaded even if we don't see them anymore. So we're out far enough so we can't see them, and they should unload, but they're not, and they're being kept loaded. So you can even have entities being processed inside those chunks and make a 5x5 grid. We'll even relog. So you can see right after relogging, they automatically come loaded again, and they stay loaded. We can also remove those chunks so that they will no longer be loaded. So you can see that we just did that. Now, even though that you unloaded them from there, they should unload in the next autosave. So you can see now we have to wait a little while, about 45 seconds between each autosave. So there you see that it finally unloaded those chunks. So in the force command, they remove the ability to choose what dimension you want to send it to. So to do that, we want to use the execute command. So we'll do execute, and then we want to go ahead and say in, and we want to say what dimension. So let's say we're going to load in the n dimension, and then we can choose to run a new command in that dimension. We're going to run the command, which is going to be the force command. Let's go ahead and run that, and then we can add chunks. Now we can even select the chunks in the overworld to apply it to the n dimension, so we can just choose this chunk and this chunk. Now we're going to go ahead and load those chunks that I just selected, but in the n dimension. So to remove chunks in the n dimension, we have to actually do the execute command over again. We can't just go ahead and say remove all chunks, because that'll only apply to overworld. Now we go ahead and remove. Now you see it has removed that chunk from the n dimension. Those tests took a little bit of time to set up and run, so hope you guys found those useful. So it seems like the 1.13.1 pre-release will bring on the 1.13 full release probably next week, so we have that to look forward to. Hopefully they still keep adding some more performance optimizations, because I feel like there is a lot of room for that. I've seen that Rock said that there would be more room to add in more performance improvements. That's something to look forward to. I'd like to thank you for watching, and if you found this interesting, show me the like and share this with others. If you'd like to see more 1.13 reviews as well as feature content, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell button. And if you have any remarks about the snapshot, tell me down in the comments. Bye-bye!